these things, I live with them every day. So to have a thought about, you know, things I'm seeing currently, you know, like, why do we have equality? Just like, why do we have a, you know, Equality Act, or you know, there's things because things are not quite right. Because when I read about the suffragettes when I was at secondary school, and to realise that women couldn't own their own stuff, so if their family died, they had to marry, or they had to do, because they couldn't. That's really. But for me, if we're looking from a cultural perspective, if we look at Africa, for example, before Europe came in there was very matriarchal societies. Yeah. So women were the leaders. You've got like Yara Santawa. There's lots of people in history of African women who were holding the fort. They were not to be messed with. Yeah. And from there, you had that respect of the woman because they can give birth and all this kind of stuff that I think the European kind of perspective kind of took away, to give, you know, African men or whoever to say that actually you belittle women and make them beneath you or something and not your equal. So it's so complex, Martin.
It is, and everything in the West has been industrialized and turned into a copy of the Enlightenment way of looking at the world, including things like education. Now, I thought I'd ask you. Yeah, you live.
Yeah, you can see I posted today. I'm asking questions, but no one's really answering, because I think people are happy to stay in a happy place of not questioning.
Yeah.
Because then it makes their job difficult, because lots of people are making money on learning. Yeah. In different ways, and that frustrates me because I struggled with learning. Do you see what I mean? And you just want people to be real and give you the access, but you assess me and attest me in a way that doesn't work for me, but it's got to be okay.
So you say you struggle with learning. What's kind of the history, your personal history of struggling with learning?
So I guess very earlier on, when I was at primary school, I knew something was wrong in terms of the way that I knew I was more than able, but what was in my head and what I could put down, what the school wanted or the primary school wasn't reflecting. So then I started to reflect, and I guess my emotional intelligence had to be really high when I'm like 8, 9 and 10 to keep persevering, because I couldn't do what they were asking me to do. But it's not that it's not that I couldn't, but I didn't know how to articulate, how to explain. I know what you're asking me, but I just can't put that down in the way. And I didn't know as a young person or a child to know, actually, I know I can do it, but can you show me a different way of doing it so I can put it down, or I'm processing it, or my memory, that was too quick for me because my memory's short. I can't tell you that as a child. I don't even know what all that is. Do you see what I mean? But I know it was happening. So my emotional intelligence, I would say, was very high from a very early age, because I had the space to do it, because I became really invisible. So I did a lot of window looking. I wasn't a sharpener kid. You got children now, because I've worked in a school who do, Miss, can I do the sharpeners, Miss? Because that's avoidance. Yeah, we call them the sharpener kids. They want to sharpen or they want to quickly do errands so they don't have to do the work. I wanted to do the work, but I just knew I didn't know how to do that. And I wasn't taught right. So when I learned to read, I remember learning to read because I was really fascinated by words. And so I would look at them to understand the meaning. So if there was a word, I wanted to understand the meaning of it, so then I could understand it, to put it in context. That's how deep a level it was for me, because that was the only way I could understand the whole concept of what you're trying to say, or what that word means in that sentence.
And yeah,
so
that at school. I mean, how did your teachers?
Sorry?
How did your teachers relate to you at school? Did they look at you as thick?
Well, I don't even have that kind of memory of the teachers, to be honest. All I remember is that when one it must have been a parents' evening or something, Martin. But this is when the turning point came. So the teacher said to my parents that that she's not going to make it. I didn't know what that really meant, but all I knew it meant academically I wasn't achieving. But that was my turning point, and I don't know if it's a positive or not. But ever since that point, I decided to try.
Okay.
more harder than anything. And I'd worked twice as hard. And I taught myself to read.
Can you remember how?
Yes, so I taught myself through pictures.
Right.
And then the words, because what happened is, if you know some words, you can then learn to skip a few words to try to make the overall sentence.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So what I started to do, I started to see those words, and they were common words, like say like because. It doesn't mean anything to me as a child. I remember it now. The word because didn't mean anything. But then when you started to put into context with the text, it became a word. Because and became very popular in my writing. And then until one day someone said, you can't keep writing and, but it just seemed like a good connecting word. But I didn't understand the whole concept of language in the sense of grammar, to know that that wasn't a word, because it was just a word I can connect with something else, because I like this, because, or, and, yeah. So what I did,
weren't helping you.
Sorry?
So the rules of grammar weren't helping you, but what was helping
well,
you was visualize
Martin, who taught me grammar? Nobody.
Right.
I didn't learn grammar until I went to university, probably properly. I got through school. And you've got to understand, this is why cultural perspective is really important, and that's why I'm putting together writing my book, because culture has an impact as well. And I wasn't privileged to that. I was in what you would call the social deprived area in East London, in Hackney, where I feel that the school, as lovely and nurturing, because back in the days in the 80s, it was a lovely nurturing environment. It was lovely. Everything was fun. Teachers are lovely. You could talk to the learning aspect. I don't know about that one. Do you know what I mean? I think they got away with a lot. I think you could change the curriculum timetable, like, oh, let's go out and play today. That's how it felt. It didn't feel like there was a plan. Let's play in the fields all day. That's how it felt. It just felt really kind of just lovely, which is great. But then where was the learning taking place? So if you got it, you got it. If you didn't, as I said, I was one of those ones who didn't. And as I said, to go back to the question, I taught myself to read. My first book, I must have been about 10, and it was called Cat in the Hat.
Dr. Seuss.
Yep. So that was my first book I learned to read. You got to imagine, if this is a 10 or 11-year-old, I should have been reading a long time ago. And I was aware of that because I was different from my peers. I was fully aware, but I was ecstatic, and that just kept me pushing and pushing. So I'm one of those people, and I know other people who are neurodiverse who do this. You know something's going to challenge you, but you feel the fear and you do it anyway, and you're just thinking, why do I keep doing this to myself? It's like a punishment. You know what I mean? You just keep going, and that's how I did it until I went to because I failed my GCSEs, and in the sense that I got a B in drama. I was brilliant at. I'm telling you now, acting was definitely my thing. And I don't know if it's just definitely because dyslexics are creative. I think my imagination, the way I thought, I really could feel the character and I could feel the words. So I was able to express that. And if I had the opportunity and the right guidance, that would have been an A star. I got a B, don't ask me, because there was writing. It wasn't just acting. So I didn't just get but I got a B. So I'm always proud of that B. But I know if I had the right privileges and opportunities, that could have been an A. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and I may have passed other GCSEs. And you got to remember, it was a time we had cover teachers all the time. When I was growing up. So how can that teacher assess you? I was brilliant at dance, but I didn't even pass. How can I not pass dance? But we had so many cover teachers. Yeah. And I just feel like we were failed. But who's going to ask? If I had a parent who had the knowledge and awareness, it would have been. Do you see what I mean? So there's some things going on there that is. My parents did the best they can, but there were some things going on there was out of their control. They didn't know the system. They came here from Jamaica very young. And what you do is you're obedient to the authority. You don't question things. And even I was like, it's very Victorian, children seen and not heard. That's how I grew up, So how can we question the system? What was teaching our children? So when I went to college, when I was 16, they must have realized that, this is the turning point for me. They must have realized that my intelligence or understanding, like I did things like government politics, sociology, and psychology, but they obviously can see how I was talking and how I was relaying the information wasn't reflecting how I was writing.
Yeah.
And somebody within the teaching must have referred me to a lady called Jenny McWhinney. And Jenny McWhinney taught me things that I'd never been taught before and how to learn. And I grasped them. So it was about repetition. It was about your memory. So she got an EP and I got a diagnosis of dyslexia. Well, I was celebrating forever because I was no longer what I would consider stupid. It wasn't just my mind. It was actually, there was a name to it. Mm-hmm. So I think that hopefully gives you an answer because I can speak for England.
No, it does. I mean, but you said earlier something which fascinated me. You said that you're interested in how culture is important. What do you mean by that exactly?
The impact of culture. So I give you an example, okay? So I know that culture plays an impact on my disability. We know about every Black Lives Matters, all these kind of things are going on. But I know that because of my circumstances, the opportunities there was no access to it unless my parents had a knowledge. The only way my mum so in primary school, I didn't tell you this because I can write a book, which is what I'm trying to do because of my experience. My mum was a kind of mum who would go and give you a fight. Not physically, but through her fat mouth, because she was very short, so she could have had the short syndrome thing, because she was very like a little bit sharp.
Yeah.
I was a bit embarrassed at times because I was all about keeping everything quiet, but she wasn't. So when she went to the school and said, "Look, my daughter's not learning," she went to those days you can go into the headmaster's office. You didn't need to make an appointment; you just went in there. And I remember feeling so embarrassed. And she went in there and knocked on the door and said, "I need to speak to you, headmaster. My daughter's not learning like her peers. She's not reading. So it was then that I had an EP. Again, I had an EP. And then I'm not going to go into it now, but I ended up having somebody like a psychotherapist. Mm-hmm. And I used to have that once a week. Mm-hmm. Not an assessment, but a psychotherapist. Oh. So I'd love to look at my records for school to see what they actually thought was going on. Yeah. Because obviously I didn't recognize the dyslexia. Yeah. So, my mum fought for me, so I did get support in school, but don't ask me, it wasn't helping me to learn. I mean, I spent the whole of my secondary school in maths doing cubes. I loved it because that's the way my brain, like how to figure out how to do different cubes, but the whole of your secondary schooling is not a good idea, is it? Yeah. So again, I'll give you an example. So my mum did the best she could. So that's another example, but because of that, the only little knowledge she had, but she got somewhere, but she's just one person who just happened to try to fight with all she could do. But I'll give you an example, for example, house cleaning. In Caribbean homes, house cleaning is very important. Right. I'm going to put it like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's a very serious, I don't want to go into Caribbean accent with you, but it's a very serious thing. It's very serious. I don't know if it's coming from a slave mentality, or from the colonial Commonwealth that, having a clean home or having, there's something here from a cultural thing. Yeah. So when I'm ready to, and I'm not saying my house is speckless like my mum. My mum was like, you go there. It was like you thought the Queen was coming to dinner. There was no, it was serious stuff. And you speak to any Caribbean children my age, that was going on. We knew the rules. So what I feel from the kind of structure of my house cleaning regime and rituals, that it helped me to have structure. Yeah. Yeah. It helped me to have routine. So when I'm ready to, when I get into that mode, it kind of comes back as a way of being able to put myself into organize myself, and that's to do with the house cleaning. So that's an example. It might be far-fetched. It's not just about the Black experience, but it's an experience that my cultural heritage of that kind of ritual has helped my dyslexia. It's impacted in a way that gives me a survival toolkit. Yeah. Does that make sense?
There's something deep down in there that if you come from a cultural background or a cultural lineage that has a particular way of going about life, that's going to affect your relationship with education and your relationship with learning. Is there in any
Absolutely.
Way, is there in
because a friend of mine, just to cut you, a friend of mine who's Irish, we have very similar backgrounds of trying to fight, fight and survive. But she said her faith did the same thing. So having that positivity because of the faith. So that's a cultural element as well. Do you see what I mean? And but again, her parents had the same thing, that kind of subservient to education. So if the teacher was right, said something, they're right. But no, they're not always right. But do you know what I mean? So again, it's that kind of thing. But you got to think, where's that coming from? It's that obedience to, be, controlled again. We kind of had that embedded in us from an Irish or a Caribbean, or do you see what I mean? Yeah.
There's almost.
So does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, is there some sense in maybe a Caribbean sort of background that dyslexia is seen as being broken, or that it's possibly a negative thing? Because you say you want this order, you want almost perfection, and dyslexia might be seen as an imperfection. Is that way off the base? Is that way off the mark?
Okay, so Martin, let me keep it real for you. When I was growing up, dyslexia wasn't a thing. It wasn't even a word. Right. We didn't talk about, what do you mean you can't read? Don't get up and get up. Just don't worry about that. It was, there was no kind of, what was that? That wasn't a thing. It's still, I know Keisha, who's doing a great work, who I've posted a few times about her mental health and well-being. If you ever talk to her about Jamaica, they're at the beginnings, the infancy of understanding neurodiversity. And even with the international Kenya, they're really, it sounds quite, sometimes, and I'm not being patronizing, quite Victorian in the way they're approaching their teaching, because we know Kenya and some places like that in Britain was very influential into their educational structures. The same with the Caribbean, where my family's from, Jamaica. The British, even sometimes it's really good, some of it, but it's very embedded is their structures. So if we look at all of that, I can't really, one thing I have to say, I only can talk about my own experiences, and I have to put a disclaimer, it's not going to be the same for everybody else. But what I do know from speaking to some of my peers who are from the Caribbean, all we can say is, what is dyslexia? There wasn't, it's like, come on, get on. We just have to work twice as hard. We don't know what this twice as hard is, but we've got to work it, because we have to sort of prove ourselves. Do you see what I mean? So to talk about it as a thing, and there is stigma, and I would incorporate African descendants into that, because if you're, I've got lots of friends who are from Nigeria, and that education is the key. Education. Caribbeans, from my experience, yes, that's true, but it depends on where you are within that structure. That you may not have, you're just a worker, just like you have the hierarchies in Sikhism and all that. Some of us didn't quite get the education exposure to think that was the key to everything. It was about working. So I will be honest with you, I had 3 jobs at one point, because that's what I was taught. We've got to work. Do you see what I mean? So it's about working. So those are all things that incorporates me and makes me kind of sometimes have that strong resilience, because I know how to work.
There's there's a phenomenon in language where when one culture gives a language to another country, so let's say where England sends the English language to America, for instance, then what you find is typically the language that the Americans speak has actually evolved far slower than the language that the English speak. So if you want to know how the English used to speak in those days, the Americans are closer to that than the English are.
I'm not looked at that kind of
you look at
linguistics,
Quebecois in Quebec, the Quebecois, the French version of, the Canadian version of French, is closer to the French that they used to speak in those days. And I wonder whether that works with culture as well, where if we're imposing a sort of a Victorian culture on Jamaica, for instance, a couple of 100 years ago, then our culture evolves, as it were, sort of not fast.
Yes.
I
like that thinking.
Hold that culture in the same way that
we wouldn't want to say that. You'd have to be careful how you say that, because
I know. I realised as I was saying it sounded terrible.
Because that means that those people have not kind of evolved, and that wouldn't be the case.
I didn't mean that.
Jamaicans are very proud of their education system, but I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying. You're onto something, but it would be how you would say that as an that would be really tricky.
Yeah.
I like that thinking, though.
There's going to be a way of saying it. Effectively, in language terms, the language that they speak in Quebec, the French they speak in Quebec, is closer to the French they used to speak a couple of 100 years ago than French. the English they speak in America, the accent, for instance, is closer to the accent we used to have in England a couple of 100 years ago.
But
because
is there any research on that,
Martin? There is.
Okay, so then you've got something there that you could, if you wasn't using it for something, then at least you've got that to back up, because it sounds plausible.
I have no idea whether it works in any kind of similar way with culture or anything, but language works like that.
Ah, you mean with culture? Yeah, I'm hearing you. Yeah, I'm hearing you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I'd have to look into that a bit deeper. Obviously, we're not specialists.
Yeah.
But so there's something interesting about that, but there's also some questions.
Here's another question then. Is there also an aspect of poverty and education? So you come from a Black Caribbean background in East London. And I'm guessing that if you come from a Black Caribbean background in East London, the likelihood of you coming from a poorer background is quite high.
I would take a shot with it, but I wouldn't want to make any assumptions. I think we have to be careful. But just like I'm in East London now in Newham, it is in fact a social and deprivational, economical, all of those list of things. So even though now we're so much more aware about grades, young people achieving, but if we take it back out into the context of the 70s and 80s, absolutely, is what you're saying. Yeah.
Is there anyone?
I don't know what the statistics were for children coming out, but I can tell you lots of my friends didn't come out with all GCSEs.
Yeah.
And it was like, it was just, the system could get away with it.
Yeah.
I'm a careers advisor of my background, and I worked in a school that the most of the young people got A's, D's, C's. They didn't get anything above a C. And that was okay, but it wasn't okay. And a lot of those children were from what we call social economical, and I think that I would have been one of those. I don't know what was going on when I went to secondary school in the 80s, so 85. I don't know what the statistics, because I wasn't being aware of that, but I probably know that could probably be likely. The same with like South London, Brixton. You know, there were pockets of areas that if you weren't in that category of privileged or old money, and you were having education that is private or what have you, you probably would have fitted into that. So does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. I mean, at the very least, my family doesn't really have money, but I come from a roughly sort of middle class background, and therefore I have middle class expectations of what my life was supposed to be.
Absolutely.
And,
where mine was just to work as hard as you can and do your best. Don't be rude, have manners, those kind of things. Those are your survival mechanisms to get you through, but to be a good person. It wasn't for me about your academic, just do the best you can. There was no pressure, which actually helped me. The pressure of not having the academic helped me to, more so to help me to achieve, because of the kind of person I was. There's got to be a character as well, but I got a knock that made me want to keep going. Do you know what I mean? I was one of the ones, but there's a lot of us who didn't make it. They're maybe in the prison system, mental health system, who didn't quite make it. And I can boil it down to education, to be honest, a system that's meant to be set up to help. So there we go.